Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. I'm Louis Cypher, and this is the Devil's Advocate Debate Club. Welcome back. Today, we say goodbye, at least for the time being, to a dear friend. Now, I did a couple of videos a while back talking about a character who at the time I believe went by the name Stoned Philosopher. He's since then tried to clean it up a little and is going by Lefty Philosophy. And he's blocked me on Twitter. Now, lots of people block me on Twitter. I really don't care. I've done videos talking about why I don't block people and why I think blocking people is a bad idea, but I think that you should have the freedom to do so, even if I think it's a mistake. This one, though, takes a little bit of a toll, because, well, Lefty was, I think, the best mirror that I was likely to find. I'll explain that in a minute. But we'll talk a little bit about my relationship with a Twitter frenemy, philosophy, the definitions of words, the stone philosopher's fallacy, and just life in general. To start, I'll explain why I think Lefty is a perfect mirror of me. We met a while back on Twitter. I believe the first topic that we discussed was determinism and the idea of whether or not free will exists. See, he talks a lot of politics, but he also talks a lot of philosophy, and seems to use philosophy and, well, his philosophical beliefs more than the hard sciences or rational reasoning when it comes to making decisions about the world and his impact on it. Or lack of, since he's a determinist and doesn't actually believe that he has any impact on the world. But that's beside the point. I was raised in an extremely left-leaning area. I mean, one that's been made fun of in pop culture for being the source of hippies at different times. And by a mother who was a liberal and has gone full-fledged into what I've started calling the alt-left. I did a video about her too. So I, growing up, tried to be rational and reasonable, but I put a lot more stock at times into people's emotions and into philosophical beliefs than I did, well, logic and statistics. Now, I was always a numbers person, so I tried to look at both and at how they fit together, and I think that despite the fact that I was almost very close to being pulled into what I would kind of consider to be a leftist cult, that's a story for another day, it was really my ability to, and my insistence upon, thinking rationally and reasonably and applying logic to the world around me as opposed to living off of emotional or philosophical beliefs that pulled me out of it. Lefty seems to have taken the opposite path. Now, I wouldn't give away a bunch of information about someone, but this is all stuff that you can find openly on Twitter, so I don't think that any of it are big secrets. Sorry, Lefty, if I'm letting some cat out of the bag here. He was raised on a military base, apparently. I mean, I take what he says at face value. I don't think that Lefty is actually dishonest, other than perhaps intellectually. And was, up until recent years, a conservative. Regrets the time that he spent as a conservative, and has only more recently, it seems, gotten into philosophy, which in his university time after his combat days. He's a combat veteran, apparently. Purple Heart, according to his profile. And, I don't know enough about his situation to say anything more than that, but I will go ahead and say that anything negative I have to say about Lefty has to do with his ideologies, not his identities, his beliefs, not who he is, because I have a lot of respect for who he is and what he's apparently been through. However, at some point in time, it sounds like after having kids, he was led down a more emotional and philosophical path, taking steps away from the right to end up, well, I would consider him fairly far to the left, but he considers himself to be pretty much just left of center, I think. And these days, I considered myself to be in the center most of my life. Looking back, I realize now that I was on the left and in a little bit of a delusional state. These days, I consider myself right of center, but still pretty close to the middle. So we were, in my opinion, just on opposite sides of the middle of the political spectrum, having reached that point from almost completely opposed backgrounds. I lived in a far-left liberal city. He grew up on a conservative military base. And I don't know that I'll find someone else with the series of life experiences and beliefs that he had. And most people that I find who are that contrary to me in what we believe, well, block me right away or stop talking. He, at least for a time, was interested in carrying on conversations. Conversations that got quite frustrating due to the stoned philosopher's fallacy. I named this after him because he's the first person who had done it to me. I've now seen it a lot more on Twitter. It's apparently a social media thing, but he does it more than anyone that I know. And some of the time, I guess, he wasn't always using the stone philosopher's fallacy when I thought he was, but he used it a lot of the time. The stone philosopher's fallacy is when the definition of a word in the way that you used it to describe your ideology doesn't fit your ideology. And so you make up a new definition that fits your argument and argue that that is the real definition of the word without providing sourcing. Now, this, really just sounds like, a child's attempt to make up language to win an argument, and that's really what it felt like. So, while I'll certainly miss some of the more constructive debates we had, it could be extremely frustrating at times to try to communicate with someone who understood and spoke English well and knew the dictionary definitions of all of these words, but absolutely refused to use them much of the time. Now, at some point, and this is after months of going back and forth, Lefty finally brought up the idea of philosophical definitions versus dictionary definitions, and how a philosophical definition of a word could be different than a dictionary definition because a philosophical one is fluid and ever-changing and could mean anything the way he described it, basically. Even though then, if you try to use the dictionary definition of the same word to apply any sort of logic to the philosophical definition, it just, well, no, that's not allowed. So, he would use the philosophical definitions of some words and the dictionary definitions of others without ever making it clear when he was choosing to do so. And by philosophical definitions of words, it could just be one philosopher's definition of that word not the largely accepted term, and this is where the stone philosopher fallacy comes into play, his own philosophical interpretation of what the definition of the word should be. So I guess that's the real stone philosopher's fallacy, is when you apply your own philosophical belief of what the definition of a word should be, rather than using any established definition and using philosophy as your excuse to do so. So I got into a conversation with somebody else about determinism and free will. Lefty kept popping in and eventually got pissed off that I called him out once again for refusing to use definitions. He gets really angry when you point this out, even though he does it all the time and has actually admitted to doing it. So he'll tell me over and over when I point out that he's doing it, that no, I'm not doing that, I never do that. But he does it all the time, and you can track his feed. Anyway, I'm actually here to send off an old frenemy, I suppose, not to bitch about Lefty, but oh god, the times that we've had. He was the one who got me doing my first video before I was really prepared or scripted on the importance of language and how we should fight against the destruction of it, because he destroys language in real time. And, I think at some point I'll probably try to, get him into a debate on YouTube or something. I mean, he blocked me on Twitter, but I know his channel. But for now, as sad as it is to not have my mirror, and well, I do think I might, if I'm not careful, lose an important part of my perspective on the world because of it. I'm sure I can find a few other Twitter people to fill the void until they block me. And actually, the guy that I've been talking to seems to be about on the same philosophical spectrum as Lefty, though I don't know his political leanings yet, or his background. I do know that English is his second language, and he's much, much more willing to use dictionary definitions and also to discuss the definitions of words until we come to a consensus, and a consensus based off of actual, academic sources. So in many ways, maybe I've just received an upgrade to Lefty. However, me and this new guy do agree on quite a bit more, it seems, about how the universe functions. And disagreements are important. Seeing different perspectives is one of the quickest ways to learn and grow. And despite being able to communicate well with each other, despite coming from opposite backgrounds and crossing each other politically and philosophically in the last several years like ships in the night, well, I'll miss you, Lefty. And if you ever feel like unblocking me, I can't promise that I won't call you out on your fallacies. I will. But it'd be good to have you back. Anyway, I'll do a more serious video about an actual subject a little bit later today. And these probably won't get uploaded until tomorrow or the next day anyway, now that I think about it. But for now, I'm Lewis Cipher. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. This has been the Devil's Advocate Debate Club.